Josh, are you there?
Yeah, hey, Dan.
All right. Welcome to another edition. We've got Demetrius Jelatis. I think I'm going to be editing this out. Okay, let me try this again. I feel like
Take
I feel
two.
like on this the day of your daughter's wedding. Oh, that was
Yeah,
smooth.
exactly.
That was
Luca
smooth.
Brasi. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Hey, Josh, welcome back. Hello, everybody. Demetrius Jelatis here. With me is Josh Burbul as we kick off another podcast episode here, Minnesota Pool Boot Camp, part of the Cue It Up podcast network. So how's it going this week, Josh?
Oh, it's going good, Dan. Yeah, things are good.
Outstanding. Well, we should have a fun conversation today. Got a couple of things that we want to talk about first, but our main topic of conversation is going to involve uh, what pro pool looks like in terms of a pursuit, whether that's a pursuit in terms of achievement or a pursuit in terms of a livelihood. And I've gotten some, this is based on some listener questions. I've gotten some listener questions about, hey, and actually a couple of my students who've been very serious in talking about like wanting to play pro pool. And then also, something that's been on my mind because as I've been coaching a couple of teenagers that are, aspiring to become top pool players. So this is something that has been really on my mind a lot. What does that road look like? Uh, what do we want for our kids that are aspiring? What should we want for ourselves, for those of us who want to play high level pool? So that's going to be kind of our main topic. But first things first, and the first thing is I've got to plug my boot camps. www.mnpoolbootcamp.com, like minnesotapoolbootcamp.com. Check it out. I do a kind of a unique deal here is a 3-day one-on-one trainings for people all over the country that are serious about getting their game to the next level. Um, I focus mostly on strong intermediate and advanced players. But if you're intermediate, don't hesitate to reach out because I've actually had some players that might not have been ready for the 3-day that I've been able to kind of help remote kind of bring them up to speed so that they can then come out here and train and make it work. But the idea is 3 days on a table, customized one-on-one training to help that person break through plateaus. So a lot of people get to a level where they're running out some tables. They can run 3-4 racks in a row on good days, but then some days it just doesn't come together. They don't really know. They haven't really seen a lot of improvement for 5 or 10 years. That's the point at which you got to make a decision. Do you want to say that that's as good as you can get and just shrug and blame it on I don't have enough time, I'm working, I didn't get the talent card, or do you want to work with somebody that can actually help identify the differences in your game? And they're subtle, man. They're not stuff you're going to see YouTube videos on because a lot of the stuff is like really, really, really small stuff. And Josh, it's funny. A lot of my students, when I first watch them play, I always think the same thing. It's like, man, these guys play good. They all play really good. But then it's like we play sets and we spar, and they barely win a game. I beat them 5-1, 5-0, 5-1, and I'm like, yeah, those differences are small, but then they're very, very big when you look at actual results. And so that's it. It's not huge stuff where somebody's going to look at your game and be like, oh, you're doing this wrong, or you don't know that shot. It's like, no, but these are small things, but you add a little bit on a couple different parts, and the results are totally different. So anyway, that's what I do. One-on-one training. I've been having fun and keeping busy. So thank you. Shout out to all my students that have flown out or drove out and stayed and trained. It's been a lot of fun. And if you are interested in getting your game to the next level, please do check out my website and reach out to me. Uh, give me a shout. I'd love to get to know you and a little bit more about your pool journey. With that out of the way, Josh, instead of a listener question today, you and I are gonna we wanted to just take a moment to talk about something else that's going on in the pool world or something else that happened, and it's a hard one. So I guess we'll just say that there's a gentleman, Tony Anagony. He's the pro pool player that was possibly most known for his role in the book Playing Off the Rail. And Tony took his life. I don't, a week or two ago. I guess time has been blurring for me, but he's not around, and that's you and I are this impacts us for a bunch of reasons, right? I mean, both because he's a pool player, because of how much how close we felt with him just through reading and rereading that book and what role that book played in our lives, but also just in terms of knowing what leads to that situation and how hard that is and how many people suffer directly and indirectly from that. So very, very, very difficult conversation, but it's been on my mind. I know it's been on your mind.
Yeah, it hit me hard, Dem. I mean, it hit me like a train. I read that on AZ, and I was hoping it was, when it first popped, I was hoping it was just a false rumor, and it turned out to be that he passed away. And it's awful. It's awful. And yeah, it's awful in a lot of different levels and for a lot of different reasons. And yeah, I've read that book probably a dozen times. I mean, I think it was written almost 20 years ago. I probably read it once or twice a year. Maybe I've read it 20 times. And yeah, you just get to kind of know, you feel like you know them as characters. And then I ran into him in Reno at a tournament there and just met him and said hi and thanked him for his work with the book. This was years and years and years ago. And he was very, very nice and very warm. And it's a tragedy and it's sad. And yeah, and it's tough to make it through the world, man. There's a lot of maintenance and for people that struggle to try to continue to move forward. And it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just like to take a minute to kind of remember, and, we talked about it, and I've read that book, front to back a number of times. I don't know, 5 times, 6 times, but I've also reread certain sections. Like you've done it different. Like you do every couple of years, you'll read through that book. And me, I do it a little different where I've read it a few times, but then what I'll do is I'll be in the mood and I'll just revisit a certain section. So I've read certain chapters many, many times, and other chapters, I might not have read as often, but yeah, I've read through the book. So the point is we both have read it. We both know it front and back, and we both have and so why do you think that book was so compelling to you? Let me just ask you that.
I was just thinking about that, Dom. I feel like for me, that book was compelling because we talked about this when we first talked on the podcast, the first one we did together when we were talking about my journey through pool. That I mentioned being in a vacuum, correct? And so what I meant was I just was alone on my journey, and I didn't really know. And this is going to dovetail into what we're talking about with pro pool and things today, but basically, I had really no clear picture idea of what the path to pro pool and what pool looked like. It just didn't. But when that book came out, it really detailed and laid out a lot of things that were benchmarks that I picked up on. He had a high run of like 126 balls playing straight pool. And I'd always heard 100 balls was kind of the benchmark. This is 20 years ago. Might be different now, but that was kind of the benchmark. So I was able to pick off these benchmarks and look at some of the things he did and some of the people he played. And he played some people that I knew of from Minnesota, and he mentioned people from Minnesota. So that book gave me a little bit of a layout, at least a fuzzy one, but better than nothing of what it looks like to go through and to travel and to play and to compete and develop your game and an introduction into pro pool. So I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'll tell you, I was probably, I might have been in like 9th grade or something when that came out, somewhere around there. So, and I was just really, really, really heavy into pool and just starting to catch a gear in terms of getting better. And so a bunch of stuff you just said connects with me. Like, first of all, milestones for sure. Not only milestones with a high run, because he had like 126 ball run, and they said that at the time when he ran that at the beginning of the book, that was his high run. And I remember like the first time I ran 126, and I was like, wow, I just totally Anagonied it. You know what I mean? It was a big deal too.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that was really cool. But even when I was a teenager and I couldn't run on that many balls, but like there was the milestones he described as like, well, when he was this age, he did this, and when he was this age, he did that. And I was like, man, I'm still that age. Let's see if I can do the same things. And then what as
Yeah.
far as like the scene where he goes out and just like describing the pro pool world or describing his road experiences, I will admit to this. It's kind of embarrassing, but like, have you okay, so like I'll tell you this. I don't know how I would ever decided I'm going to share this with anybody, but when I was like 13 or 14, there was one of the top players in my area that I like looked up to. Like this guy was just in my mind, he was like the stone gunslinger, top player. I was just like, this guy is like he was one of my heroes, right? I was just like, I want to be just like him. Well, when he shot, he fluttered his ring finger, right? And so like it just like it would just kind of like float a little bit here and there, kind of clawed the cloth a little bit, like it was just whatever. And I was like, man, that's what players do. And so like when I was like 14, I tried to flutter my finger. Like I thought like somehow that was gonna make me a player, right? So okay, I'm a little sheepish about that. But like the point is that I was very influenceable. Influential. What's the opposite of influential? Influenceable? Is that something?
Impressionable.
Impression. Thank
Maybe?
you. Thank you. That's for
Yeah.
sure a good word. We'll go with that. So I was very
Okay.
impressionable. And so when I was reading through this, I was just like, oh, this is what players do. Like everything Tony did, I was like, that's what players do. That's what players do. This is how you do it in the big leagues. And so I was just like,
Yeah.
it wasn't just like how good he played or whatever, or like what he did, but like I was just like, oh, he does, Aikido or whatever. What did he do? Is it Tai
Yeah.
Chi?
Keto by the pool. That's like one
Aikido
of
by
my
the
favorite parts of the
yeah,
book.
Aikido by the pool. I'm like, well, that's you gotta, it's like I gotta do Aikido by the pool. So it's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
man. I was just like, it was just it's hard to explain because it was more than just a good story and it was more than just some funny scenes and some good play. But it was just like everything he did, I was just like he was kind of a quiet hero for me during a really
Yeah.
impressionable part of my youth.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of elements of the book down that go through and I think you might have read some of these excerpts to your students at times, and there's just some solid stuff in there about the journey and the mental side of pool and the challenges and it's just there's a lot of good stuff in that book besides just stories. There's a lot of good things.
Yeah, there's lessons to learn,
Eh,
and the
Yeah.
highs and the lows, man. He had some highs and he had some lows in
Yeah.
that story. It wasn't like some
Yeah.
delusional movie where he just everywhere he goes, he's like nothing but trick shots and he always wins. It's like no, the human fly or whatever, right? The Chelsea Ripper,
Yeah. Napoleon with the goggles.
yeah. There's definitely and the payball
The
game
do
at the end.
factor,
Yeah, the do
everything.
factor,
Yeah.
Junior Harris, yeah. Or no, Danny Green,
Yeah.
Danny Green, my bad.
Danny Green, but then he loses to Junior Harris in the last line on that chapter is goddamn Junior Harris.
Yeah.
He lost on the hill.
I remember
Yeah.
I found a video of Junior Harris playing Jimmy Wedge, who Jimmy was our top player in Minnesota during the 90s and some of the 2000s. Anyway, so I found a match of Junior Harris playing Jimmy Wedge, and I was just like, I want to see Junior Harris play. And anyway, it's pretty funny because
Yeah.
that's how meaningful it was. So let's do this. Let's each pick. Can you share? I know that the whole book, like if you had to pick a favorite part, you'd say the whole book, but just share one. It's not even your favorite part. That's too much to ask, but just share one part of that book that you really enjoy.
Oh, well, there's something else I want to talk about with the book too, but let me think about that. Can you go first, Tim?
Well, go ahead. Talk. What else did you have in your mind?
Oh, well, we were kind of talking upbeat about it, and I didn't want to drag it down, but I've reread it immediately when I heard of his passing. I decided I'm going to read it again, front to back, and maybe this could be my favorite part. That's fine because it was very meaningful to me on this go through for reading it because I looked back at it now, knowing what I know about his struggles, and I looked at it and I saw the struggles that he was having with businesses that were, and starting with his marriage and his kids and the pull between family and pool and his desire to play pool professionally and his his first wife he had, and he had a child with her. And it really, like, the struggles that he had are the struggles that I've had, because I have a wife and 3 kids and a business. And it's very hard to try to play pool at a high level and have this pull of a real life, of a balanced life. And that balanced life pull, I think he struggled with his entire life. And obviously he struggled with depression and some things as well. And it's just this time reading through, it hit me. Like, when you read it the first time, or the few times until I knew what happened to him, I just thought, well, he's struggling. He's doing this. He's doing the best he can. He's got some pulls coming from other areas of his life. But they talk about in the book that while he's on the road and he's traveling, he's getting taken over basically from his partners in his pool room. And he's divorced from his wife, and he's got his kid gets in a car accident. It's like, there's a lot of distractions and things. And I think that he's also struggling. Like, when he struggles, they talk about him struggling and his distractions. And I don't know, it landed with me a lot harder now, knowing how deeply he was struggling, not just general struggling, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, no, that's for sure. It's easy to gloss over it and just, kind of not really. I mean, it's like when you read it, it's like a few seconds of text on your way to some other exciting story. Whereas when you live it, it's a little different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, man. And I've been trying to think of a favorite part of the book, and maybe that's just too tough, because the entire book is just so rich that it's really, I guess the part when he's playing Danny Green, I kind of like it when Danny Green snatches the rook off the guy's chessboard. I don't know why.
That was good.
Like, so these guys are playing chess for money, and Tony is playing with Danny Green, and Danny Green is like super hard to pin down to get a game. And I don't know I don't think Danny's around either too. I'm pretty sure about that. And that's because I saw another thread on AZ Billiards that he's not around anymore.
Oh yeah, that might have happened last year or so. Yeah.
Gosh, man. So it's tough action. But anyway, Danny was like really, really like, what's the word? He kind of like quirky and high energy and maybe high energy. And so anyway, he was like really, really playful. And he was really hard to play for Tony, because he was like bouncing around and sharking him and doing all these little things. And then these 2 guys were playing chess for money at the counter. And when they weren't paying attention, or when one of them was in the bathroom, like, Danny took a rook off the board. And then a little bit later, some of the guys, like, Danny's like, "Oh, hey, did you want this? This fell off the board." And the one player's like, "Yeah, of course I wanted that. That's my rook. I was wondering what was wrong with my position." And then the other guy's like, "Wait a second." And then they called it, even though the other guy was losing, he's like, "I'm not paying on this game." And the guy's like, "Danny, you're a real," you called him a name, and he's like, I don't know. It's just little things, like the little color in that book is very, very funny. So I can't even pick a theme, man. The whole book. Anybody that loves pool, I think that there's 2 really, really must-read pool books. And I think that Playing Off the Rail is at the top. And then I actually really liked Buddy Hall's autobiography, From Rags to Rifleman, Then What? And that one's really hard. It's out of print. It costs like $250 on eBay. So not everyone's going to be able to get that. But Playing Off the Rail you can get. And I'd encourage you to pick it up. And just.
Yeah, awesome book.
And then I just, I don't even know how to do this, but for anybody that's going through a hard time in life, like we talk about pool and upbeat stuff and, road stories and all this stuff. But in the end, I mean, a lot of people, including me and you, that have, anybody that turns this much of their attention, energy, and heart into, shooting balls into a pocket, there's a lot of times there's a lot of pain in the background mixing around, or a lot of struggle in the background mixing around, that's motivating people to take that kind of extreme action. And so everybody that's listening, we don't know you, but we care about you, and we want you all to take care of yourselves. And I don't even know how to I don't even know how to say what I want to say. Yeah, no, you said it perfect. I mean, honestly, I was just going to say, perfectly well said, man. And just if you're struggling, just try to find help, try to reach out, try to get someone to help you. All right. Well, Water Dog. Okay. Anyway,
Yeah,
moving on.
water dog.
Got to get him a gaffer.
The gaffer.
Okay, the gaffer.
Get him a gaffer. Yeah, I beat you to it. The gaffer.
All right. So what was our conversation topic today? So the question is, what is, like for somebody who writes in, or for somebody that asks me the question, hey, I want to be a pro pool player. That, like, what are the, how feasible is it for me to become a pro? I've literally had multiple people ask me this. How feasible is it for me to be a pro pool player? And so that, as we've talked about, Josh and I talked about this a little bit before we flipped on the microphone, because we're like, yeah, like how that conversation could go 100 directions in terms of like definitions, in terms of like livelihood, in terms of training, in terms of like where do you even start? But I think we can kind of start to put a leash on this conversation a little bit by saying, we could start by talking about some different meanings of pro pool. So when you think of pro pool, Josh, what do you think pro pool means to you?
I think that pro pool to me means a level of play in the U.S. If we're to because, and we'll get into it, but you almost, I don't spoiler the money part, but to me, I take the money part out of it and I look at level of play, because the money is so insignificant, and it's except at the very, very, very minuscule highest level of percentages, that I look at it as benchmarks to defining how you're actually physically playing the game. That to me is what pro pool is in the U.S. at this point, because there's no tour and there's no money, basically. So
yes, yeah, that makes sense. And so what skill level do you consider, I guess, to be pro pool?
Well, again, benchmarks, right? So because I just think there's a level of balls pocketed, and like straight pool used to be a benchmark. We talked about Anagony with 126. I feel like when I first got started down a path of playing pool and wanting to go towards a professional level, I looked at how I would perform in professional events. And so I think that has something to do with it. Like, how do you do in professional events playing in pro tournaments? So
I agree with what you just said quite a bit. And I'll give you an example why, because I think that's the problem with Fargo rate. Okay. And let's just say that you've got two people. I'm not even going to name a Fargo rate. I'm not even going to specify what the Fargo rate. Let's just take, there's two people that have the same Fargo rate. One of them never leaves their hometown and plays local and regional bar table tournaments, playing bar table 8-ball, bar table 9-ball against amateur players. And they dominate on the regional scene. So they've won tournaments, a lot of regional tournaments. They're usually one of the top picks in the Calcuttas and their local and regional tournaments. And so they do a very good job playing like the local tour scene as far as like, regional bar table or regional events. And they're, beating worse players and holding up under pressure. And, occasionally they run into some other regional champs or whatever, but they're basically, they are one of like the 5 or 10 people in a few states that take turns winning, the regional stuff. And that player's, grinding out money. Like, is that player a pro player? Well, to me, I would say no. Even if they're playing at the same Fargo rate as somebody, and even if they're making income doing it to some extent, and we could talk about that in a little bit. But to me, you take somebody with the exact same Fargo rate and who is going and traveling and playing Derby and Turning Stone and the Texas Open and the US Open, or, it's international and different, 5 stops a year beyond that. And that person, take a guy exactly like, for example, Chris Robinson, okay, or Tyler Steyer, where these guys are playing, and I'll just say Chris Robinson. Like Chris Robinson, he's going out and he's playing all the events, right? And he's playing on the Mosconi Cup, and he is playing and cashing and making deep runs in tournaments. Now, he hasn't won a major, yet. Okay. But he is playing full time, traveling, playing all the big events, and he's here's some of the things that stand out. So he's playing all the majors, he's beating top players, not infrequently. Like he's got a lot of scalps. Like he's playing world champions and knocking them out of tournaments and making deep runs in pro tournaments. He's cashing and making good cashes in multiple pro events, and he's doing it across the country on 9-foot tables in pro arenas, and against international competition. So to me, I think of Chris Robinson, I'm like, yep, pro player. But then you could literally have a guy with the exact same Fargo rate who doesn't leave their hometown and beats up on weaker players in amateur fields. And I think of that person, I'm like, well, they play really good, but to me, that doesn't seem pro to me. That's it. That's how. So it's weird for me because I don't even say it so much as for me, it's not just about the Fargo rate. It's about what they do with their gifts and what they do. And I think so. When you were talking about like pro player accomplishments, like pro tournament cashes, and I kind of feel like your resume in professional tournaments, I think, is important. But that's everybody gets to define it on their own, right? Because there is no definition in terms of benchmark that's universal. So now we're just sharing our own opinions. Like that's my opinion. What do you think of that?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that I'm not. Yeah, I do think Fargo rate is good, and it does lay out. It does help the conversation for defining things. So I do believe that, or think that there's some validity there. And I think it's a good. I think Fargo rate's awesome. So that's it. And you're not saying Fargo rate's not awesome. So I get that. But that aside, I hear what you're saying, and I think that's true. I think that's true. I think that.
And just to clarify, Josh, I think there's a difference. Like I think that with Fargo rate and dominating a local scene, I think you could say this person plays, pro level
at a professional level.
But I think there's a difference between saying the person plays pro level versus the person's a pro. And I think that's what that's why I was stumbling. I was stumbling on that. I would like to say that a person that does what you described plays professional level, but I don't consider them a pro pool player. Now, but we could also talk about maybe they're a pro pool player, but we'll talk about how much money they actually make. And if that's comfortable for them and they can make that work, and that's how they derive their income, and that's what they do every day when they wake up, then maybe they're a professional player. It's a lower tier professional player, but they're doing it for a living. So it depends on if we're talking about ability or income. And I think that with pro pool, you have to talk about, I think and I'll tell you what I think most people think of when they hear pro. So, but I think when we talk about pro pool, as we'll see when we get into income, we almost have to be talking about ability, resume, and what they're can they compete in pro events against the top players in the world and have a reasonable chance of holding up against that skill and that pressure. I think that's what most people think of when they hear pro, because if we talked about livelihood, then that's not a very good scale to make, because there's many people that we would definitely consider to be pros that don't meet the criteria of livelihood and sustainability. So that's what I think. So I think we're talking skill. And I think when most people think of pros, like when, for example, and I've thought about this, like when somebody says, I want to go pro, or if somebody's like, do you think I can be a pro someday? I think the picture that they have in their head, I think they're talking about the people that are full-time players traveling from tournament to tournament to tournament, playing international events and winning their share and getting their share at the highest levels of play. So whether that's actually a Shane Van Boning, whether that's a Clenty Kachi, whether that's a John Mora, or whether that's a Chris Robinson, like I think in their mind they're thinking there are people out there that travel around, play major tournaments, play top world-class players, and win their share. That to them, I think, is what they're talking about when they say pro.
Yep, and that's totally reasonable. I just think there's a financial conversation that we'll have around that. So, yeah. So whether they should do it is another question, but your definition of what you're describing is, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then with that kind of out of the way, I did want to kind of talk about the financial side, because we've been talking about it and flirting with it. So we just might as well work that into the conversation now. So there's a follow-up question then. If that's pro, what does that pay to be a pro? And then there's another question which I want to get to, which is, can it be done? And that's actually another question I wanted to throw in there. But as far as what it pays, so this is where Josh and we don't get like, and I think a lot of people, it's not that we're trying to be like pessimistic, but I just want to be realistic with what, pro pool yields. And so what I would say is, I think everyone that talks about pro pool players that understands this has like different tiers, right? Like different buckets. And so the buckets I'm going to try to describe are as follows. I would say that you've got somewhere between 3 to 10 players that are consistently year after year in the top 10. Okay. So for example, right now, Shane, Filler, Shaw, Fedor, Dennis, those 5 players, and there might be a couple more. I bet those 5 players just jump off the chart. Okay. Those 5 players, if you had to bet, like if you told me, hey, in 2022, I bet you that, Dennis Arcolo is not in the top 10. I might take you on that bet. Or if you told me you don't think that Fedor or that Filler is going to be in the top 10, I'd be like, yeah, I'll take that bet. I mean, I'm pretty confident that they will stay. Now, everyone's got a shelf life, right? Dennis is getting older, Shane's fishing. And I mean, I'm not saying they're going to stay there forever. And actually, that's another great point that we're going to get to is longevity. But the point is, if you wanted to bet that Filler or Fedor are not going to be in the top 10 next year, like I'd give you action. So that's okay. So that's my first bucket, guys that are consistently in the top 10. And I think that there's even though there's 10 top 10 spots, there's only like 5 guys that are consistently in the top 10. And those are the guys that have year after year after year that are good, Hall of Famers, winning majors on a somewhat regular basis. Then you've got the second tier. And these are guys that are they have great years every few years. For example, Albin Ocean, James Aranis, Niels Fayen, Clenty Kachi, these guys that are like as good as, even Skylar Woodward, Alex Pagulayan is kind of in that tier right now. You've got these guys that on any given year, any one of those guys could be like go on a huge tear. In fact, any one of those guys could be player of the year. Like Clenty Kachi could be player of the year in 2022. Like that's possible. Albin Ocean could do it. James Aranis could break through and do it. You know what I mean? Like any one of those guys could just be like catch their gear and do. I mean, that's what Fedor did last year, and that's what Filler did the year before. So it's like any one of those guys I just named could have a great year. But and some of them have, like Albin Ocean has had a great year. Clenty Kachi, 2017 was an amazing year for Clenty Kachi. So they're all good enough to have a good year every now and then, but not consistently year after year after year. So they might have one good year and then 2 slow years, and 1 good year and 3 slow years. So these are people that are having one good year intermittently, but they're going to have more than one good year, just not consistently. Okay, so you got the every year is a good year, then you've got the every few years is a good year. And then you've got the guys that have had one good year. And that's like the next tier down where you get guys like, it gets a little bit, murky, but like, Chris Melling or, John Mora or people like this, where it's like, where they've had, Roberto Gomez, maybe they've had 1 year where really, or Mika Immonen is a great example. Like he's had back-to-back US Opens. He was the player of the year, won the back-to-back US Opens, won a bunch of tournaments. He had a really, really strong 2 years. And then that was kind of like, he did it, but he hasn't been able to really do that again, And I think there's a lot of people that have had one good year where they burst on, had 1 year where it came together and they won a major, but then it wasn't really repeatable, even on an every few years basis. So, and maybe those names weren't the perfect examples, but I would say then, so you've got your guys that always have a good year. You've got your guys that have intermittent good years. You've got your guys that have had one really good year. And then you've got your guys that haven't even really ever had a great year. They just are trying to have that great year. And I don't want to name names because it almost sounds insulting, although there's no shame in this. But like, they're trying to have that breakthrough year where they win a major and catch their gear. So I think that those are the levels that I break it down to. And I would say if I had to just use an estimate as far as number of people, I would say that there's like 5 guys that are in that bucket where they consistently have a good year. There's probably like another 10 or 15 or maybe 20 that have a good year every few years. Then there's probably like 50 that have had one good year, or maybe 30 that have had one good year. And then there's maybe a couple hundred that are trying to have that good year. And this is out of a player population of, let's just say, about 250 players that are all traveling and playing full-time and pursuing pool full-time internationally. What do you think of my breakdown? Does that, from the way I framed it, can you follow along? And does that?
Okay. From my experience, I think you nailed it. I mean, I think you exactly nailed it perfectly. Yep. And
yeah.
And I can't speak on the top tier. I can't speak on the second. I could speak on the second to third tier because about the finances of it. So I don't know if we're at that point or I don't want to jump the gun on you. That's what I'd like to chat about because I have a couple experiences with that.
All right. So I want you to take the lead. You tell me roughly what you think these income levels pay at those tiers.
Oh, this is totally guessing. The first tier is guessing. I think the top 5 guys can make a living comfortably and have sponsors and travel, and they're making money where they actually have money that hits their radar and they're doing well. Like they're right at 100 or 200 range, maybe. And I think that maybe one guy is at the 200 or 300 range, or 2 guys, and everyone else is kind of scraping closer to 100. That would be my guess. Like I said, I can't speak on it directly, but I think that's where they're at. And what I do have experience with is talking and getting direct conversation with one player. And this guy was doing this. The downside was it was a while ago. It was 15, 20 years ago or whatever it was. But the upside for him that he had going for him was there was a full tour at the time. So he was playing but this is back when they had full pro tours in the US. And so that second tier, third tier in that range, I think those guys are breaking even. Maybe they have some sponsorships that might help them squeak out. So maybe if you're in the second tier, maybe you're making 30 to 100 if things are going well or you're doing okay with your sponsors. I would say not 100. I would say like mid 5 figures if you're just killing it in that second tier. And I think once you get into that second, third tier, you're kind of breaking even with some sponsors, with all the traveling and everything. And I know this, or I'm basing this on, I shouldn't say I know this, I should say my experience with it is that I talked to a guy that was ranked 7th in the world back when there was full tours in the US. And his takeaway was that year that I got my 7th in the world ranking or whatever it was, he goes, I would have done better to stay home and work for $15 an hour after all my expenses and everything cleared out. And so that was very eye-opening to me. And I had that conversation with him 20 years ago. And then recently, within the last 10 years, I had a conversation with a person a friend, a pro player I was talking to was really close with a guy that put all his eggs in the basket to make the Mosconi Cup, made the Mosconi Cup that year and lost money playing pool with his expenses. He did not make money that year, and it cost him money to get qualified to the Mosconi Cup. And that's how much he was winning to get qualified. And it was a break-even year for him, or he lost a little bit. So that's my experience. So anyone below that is just scratching and clawing and just couch surfing and doing all that, So
Right. And we could talk
That's
about
it, Dan.
lifestyles, like all different alternative incomes, but in terms of primary income, yeah, I think you're right on. I think that like the people at the very top, the 3 to 6 guys that are consistently having good years, yeah, they're making 6 figures on an annual basis. When you go to the second tier, you got that 20 guys that are taking turns having a good year, or maybe those 12 guys that are taking turns having a good year. Uh, those guys will have a good year, and when they have a good year, they might make 80,000 or something, or 100,000. But then the problem is that then the next 3 years are break even or whatever, and then it's pretty tough. Like, for example, there was one player I know that won a world. I mean, they won a world championship and won a pretty hefty. I think it was, I don't remember if it was $75,000 payout. But then the problem was, I think they were backed and they had debts, and so legitimately, like, they were broke after they won that thing, and then they didn't have another good year for a couple of years, and it's like,
Man,
it's really tough. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
we're just being realistic. Like, this is very, very difficult. And then, like you said, you get to that third tier where guys that have had one good year, and it's like pro pool is not going to be a profitable venture at the highest level. Now, so that's it. And now we can talk about
anything other than the extreme elite highest level.
Anything other than the top,
the 1%. Yeah.
And so before we talk about their actual lifestyle, because I want to talk about, like, well, what is possible, then how do these guys live, and what makes sense. I want to just say there's a question that you and I have never, I think we'd hinted at talking about this, but I wanted to ask you, if somebody says, I want to get to the level where I play, I'm going to devote, like, suppose you had a 14-year-old and they said, I want to be in the top 5 where I'm consistently having good years, beating everyone in the world. And I know it's tough, but if I'm going to be the best in the world. And if I'm the best, if there's always room at the top, if you play good enough, I'm all in, I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to get to the very top of pool. Would you, like, you wouldn't have to tell them yay or nay, like, they're going to do this regardless of your encouragement, because they're just thinking, like, everybody else thinks it can't be done, but that's because I'm me. But, like, in your personal opinion, like, if you had to answer the question, can that person do it? Like, of course there's a chance, but, like, the question is pro pool a goal that somebody can achieve? Like, if they make up their mind to, that's a given. Like, if they've made up their mind, it's a given that they can get the job done. Is that a given or not?
What do you mean? Is it a given? Is it? Can they guarantee they're going to get there?
If I told you that I was going to get a job at Taco Bell, and that I was going to make minimum wage, but that I was going to save up $200, like, that is a goal that you could say, well, if you live within your means, you could do that. You could get a job, you could earn income, you could save $200. Like, yes, that is a goal. There's no doubt that can be done. Like, if somebody decides that they want to play pro pool and get to the level where they're consistently having good years, is that a goal that you feel that if somebody devotes their life to it, that they're certain to succeed? Or is that a goal that even if somebody devotes their life to it, there's not a certainty of there's not a certainty of a successful outcome?
Well, I think you could say that about a lot of things, not just pro pool, but I think it's extremely possible. It's just impossibly difficult. That's it. It's very, 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 it's possible. Like, I'm a kind of an anything's possible guy. And so I start from that viewpoint, but I believe it's possible if a person wanted to do that. But I have seen a lot of that road personally, and I've seen a lot of that road through relationships and things, and it's very, very difficult. So it's an impossibly difficult road that's possible. So, like, the U.S. players, Shane did it. I mean, so it's not impossible. I mean,
yeah. So,
but we could talk about, like, what it would take to do that, like how impossible it is, and the resources you would need. And I mean, that's the conversation that I would want to have.
So here's where I feel,
what would it take? Like, with that person, with that 14-year-old, I would want to have that conversation.
Where I feel like you shifted things was, I know it's possible, but is it something that might be achieved, or is it something that can be achieved? That's what I was saying, because I'm of the opinion, of course it's possible. And of course there's going to be people, like, each decade or each generation has its 5 players that get the dominant. This generation, it's been the last 15 years, it was, Shane and Dennis and, I'm trying to think of like the players, so, Ralph Souquet,
I
whatever.
guess Alex within that last 10 or
Alex,
15 years.
thank you. I
Yeah.
was looking for Alex. And then now there's going to be Fedor and Filler, and there's going to be a couple new guys, but
Yeah, and Shaw.
so, Shaw. So it can be done. Obviously it can be done. But the point is this, is it something that can happen, or is it something that will happen? And my point is, if you look at, for each Filler and for each Fedor, I can name 50 players that have gone all in on pool. In other words, they've played snooker since an early age. They got coaching. They played international tournaments. They play full time. They have put in every bit as much in terms of, well, and okay. No, I haven't sat beside them and seen their hours on the practice table. And maybe if I zoomed in on their life and like really, really, really had a, if I was omniscient and I really knew their souls and hours and will, obviously there might be some differences. Okay. But in terms of the general saying, like, did they devote their lives, make the sacrifice, and say, I am going to get to the very top of pool and give my life to do so? And then they've played full time and traveled around the world, making no money for year after year after year, trying to will their game into being the best of the world. I could show you 200 guys that have done that are still waiting to win a major. And and so the point I would have is, of course it can be done, but it's very hard to figure out what it takes to be a Josh Filler versus to be a John Mora versus to be, a Chris Robinson. It's very, very, very hard to figure out how you get that lightning in a bottle. And if somebody was saying, and if somebody answers that question, like if you were talking to an aspiring, world champion that said, well, I'm going to get there because I want it, and it's me, and I'm going to go, and I'm just going to not do anything else in my life and just go all in on being the best player in the world. And that's all I'm going to think about. I'm just going to keep playing top players and gambling and losing and matching up and fighting and training. And I'm not going to look up until I get there. That's not a good answer, because that's actually the price of admission. Like that's what Ruslan Chinakov, and that's what, Jean Salim, and that's what all these guys are doing. So that doesn't guarantee success to the highest level. That just is the price of admission into that group of 250 people vying for the top spot. And now a whole other conversation is on what actually determines the top five. And that I can't say, but the problem I would say is, if somebody's plan is to go all in on pool, that does not guarantee that they will be a world champion. Based on the statistics, I would say it puts you at a spot where if there's 5 guys that do it, or 5 guys that have consistent good years out of hundreds of people trying, I mean, you're almost a
2% chance of getting out of those. Yeah.
Yeah, and so not to say that it's total luck, right? But I'd say you're kind of a 50 to 1 underdog, and so that's not to say it's all luck. And I'm not smart enough, and I haven't gotten to the highest level, so I can't tell you what Filler and Fedor have in common that Ruslan Chinakov and John Mora don't. But all I know is that all I can talk to is the numbers, which is that even I guess my point is that it is possible to break into the top 5 where you're consistently having good years, but it's not the kind of aspiration that you can take on with any guarantees of success, because there's a whole lot of people trying that gave everything they had and it didn't really pan out. So while I'm not saying it's impossible, there's no guarantees. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. Like it's a very, 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 very difficult journey. And if I was talking to a person that was considering that path, I would ask them, how are you going to do that? What does it mean to you? I would ask them all the questions about their finances and their resources and their plan and their training and there's a big conversation, but the bottom line is, even if they had like the greatest plan in the world and all the resources in the world, it doesn't guarantee anything. Like nothing's guaranteed. It's an impossible journey. So in a nutshell, it's almost impossible and nothing's guaranteed, but it still could be the right call. You could still make that call if it was meaningful to you and important to you.
Absolutely. And I think that the last thing I mentioned earlier was longevity. The people that get to the top, even the people that are in that group having consistent years, that seems, of course, every player has a different longevity, but I think 10 years is a safe bet. Like, in other words, even when you get to the top, you probably have, Shane had 10 years and he's still doing well, but I don't think he's going to have another 10 years like his last 10 years. If anybody wants to bet that his next 10 years look like his last 10 years, or from 2007 to 2017, I don't think that's going to happen. And guys like Ralph Souquet or even Alex, Earl Strickland, Efren Reyes, I mean, they all did so well. And some of those guys had, 15, 20-year careers. But there's also guys that have had 3 to 5 year careers too. So it averages out, I'd say 10 to 12 years at the highest level. And then, you got Corey Deuel and Johnny Archer and these guys that play really, 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 really good, but they're not at the highest level anymore. It's hard to stay there. I mean, Corey was there for, probably less than 10 years at the highest level before he got eclipsed already by, Shane and then the Eurobots. So anyway, and it's just very, very tough. So anyway, I think the only other thing I was going to say is even if you get there to where you're having year after year that's actually consistently successful, better put that money in the bank, but okay. And yeah. I'm not trying to be negative. So then let's go to the positive end.
I just think it's an eyes wide open thing is the way I'd look at it, Dom.
That's it. This is an educational.
A 14-year-old was talking about this. Just have your eyes wide open. And as long as like eyes wide open, here's the possible path and here's the possible things. And that's the information that I would want to get to that person.
Yeah, and it might sound to somebody like I'm saying, it can't be done. It's because I didn't get there because I'm not good enough to get to the top. So I'm like sour grapes or something. And that's not it at all. The fact is I have a ton of admiration, respect for people that go all in. And I, just to be clear, don't think of them as failures. Like I look at a guy like John Mora, who is, here's a guy who's probably in his early 30s. And he is in his early 30s. He travels around full time, plays all the top tournaments. Okay. He hasn't won like a lot of majors. I think he won a Turning Stone and he just won a one pocket tournament that had some top players in it. But like he hasn't won a US Open or a world championship. But and he's not even, so he's in the category of guys that not only is he not having a good year every year or a good year every few years, I'm not even sure if he's ever really had a good year like once, like the way that we would say that Albin Ocean has or something. However, I'm not dogging on the guy at all because I look at a guy who's kind of walks the earth like Kane, like they said in Pulp Fiction, I'm going to walk the earth. Like he kind of walks the earth and goes from tournament to tournament and practices and plays his heart out. And he's got like this artistic pursuit of excellence, and he plays his heart out and he plays hard and he plays incredibly well. And he has moments when he puts his game together and does amazing things. And he has a meaningful challenge and he's living a purposeful life. And so I would never look at that and say like, well, yeah, what does it pay? See, and just because he's better than me or he's achieved things I haven't, like I have no sour grapes about me. We were just eyes wide open type stuff. The fact is I have a lot of admiration for people that walk that journey for pure reasons. And I think we all can respect that.
Yes, fully.
So then it's interesting. So then people are like, well, how do these guys actually sustain this living? And this is where, different people do it differently, right? So you've got, for me, that's the reason why I didn't go all in on pool. And that's the reason why I decided to get a job, because I wanted to have, I didn't want to sacrifice, having a house, a family, and I just didn't quite want to sign up for that road. But now here I am teaching full time. And so there are players, and I think Mika's one of them, right? Where he had a great couple of years at 07, 08, hasn't played at the highest level since, but he plays really, really, really good. And so what he does then is he teaches to subsidize his income. So you've got players that open up pool halls, like Johnny Archer's opening up a pool hall, I think in Atlanta, Georgia. And so you've got players that are opening up pool rooms. You've got some players that go into making cues. You've got players that are doing lessons. So I think that there's some kind of like, I wouldn't even call them side hustles, but there's for people that have the name recognition of having reached the top of pool or play very, very good pool, that does open up avenues to where, whether it's, sponsorship, although I don't know that that's really, that can help offset expenses, but unless you're exactly at the top, it doesn't really do much. So in the end, I just say that if somebody wanted to say, what are the chances of making a living like Shane? It's not very good. But if like, what are the chances of being able to do something pool related? Like, you could potentially develop a massive skill set with pool and then use your abilities and gifts and knowledge of the game to, you could run and promote tournaments, or you could do, youth tournaments and put together a tour, or, Mike Zuglin and Pat Fleming, they were both really, really good players, right? I mean, they both played really well, and they both run tournaments and tours, and they're promoters. So like, there's different ways to bring revenue into yourself in the industry, but it's just not going to be strictly from tournament winnings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if people wanted to know how do these pros do it where they can sustain if they're not making money, and I would say the answer is that either they're bringing in income in some other way, or they're living a very, very, very minimalistic lifestyle where, like you said, there's, couch surfing and staying, so what happens is, like, when you're a top player, right? Like, say, and I'm not saying that this person lives this way, but like, I'll take Shane, because everyone knows that Shane is doing well enough. He doesn't ask for handouts, right? But let's just suppose that Shane needed help. Like, he could probably, people would put him up in their house because they'd be like, man, Shane wants to stay with me. That's awesome. So he could go every time he went into different talents. He could go to the pool room, and somebody at the pool room would be like, man, you're welcome to stay at my place. And they'd buy him meals, and they'd take him around and show him around the town and put him up. And so it's like, when you're a good player, you can kind of get a little bit of homage money, and people will play you. You go into any pool room, people play you some cheap sets, and all that income is not reported. You can play guys $50 sets so that they say they played you, and you get to pick up a little cash. So it's like, if you don't really have anything, you don't have, if you don't have a house and you don't have children to provide for, and you're willing to just kind of go pool hall to pool hall, paycheck to paycheck, these guys can kind of like float around and just bring in enough money through some homage and through some handouts to where, and then they can rob some regional tournaments and local tournaments here and there that let them sneak into the field, and I snapped off 800 here, 1500 there once in a while, and they get to do that just enough to where they're not, even the people that aren't really making any money, they can at least, and then people will back them too. That's the other thing, is people want to be in their corner and have a horse, so they can get backers to pay their expenses and put them in tournaments so that they can get backers to kind of pay their way around. So I think that if people are willing to get backers and handouts, and then kind of like get some homage money, that they can kind of float around and just sustain. And I think that happens more. I think that that's a pretty common scenario. What do you think?
Sorry. Yeah, I think so. Sorry. Yeah, I don't think that's uncommon. I think that's a pretty good recap of what can happen and what does happen. Yeah.
So, okay, so that's, I just kind of wanted to answer, because I think that's a logical question. If it doesn't pay, how are all these people doing it? And I don't know how it works in Europe and China, by the way. I'm just speaking of what I know, which is mostly the U.S. So
that's a very good point, Demi, because I've also talked to a couple players, and some of those countries they're paid to practice and play, and they're kind of salaried and expenses covered. So I think if you get into the why is the US this way and why are the Eurobots in China that way, I think it comes down to resources, I think, a lot. And in the US, it's expensive to live, and we've kind of gone over how tough it is to grind through and break through. And it's resources. It's all resources. If you have the resources, then you could put the time in, and you don't have to worry about trying to make money other ways. So.
Yeah. And there's definitely, I know that there are countries that do that. I'm not sure that Europe does that. And so the reason I bring that up is I saw an AZ Billiard thread where somebody was saying, oh, people always talk about how we get, salaries, or it's easier in Europe. And they were like going on this big tear about how,
I'm talking on my ass with that one.
No,
yeah.
I think there are countries that do it. I just want to clarify. I think in Europe, I don't think that stipends are a big thing. I think that there's a lot of guys out there doing a lot of what's going on in the U.S. If there's one difference real quick between the U.S. versus Philippines and Europe, and we can have that one another time, but I'll just say, I think size of the country means a lot. The European countries, they're, especially the guys in the UK, the Euro Tour and stuff. It's like those the tournaments are all more geographically close together, and the players are more geographically close together. Certainly in the Philippines, it's so much smaller that you have so what happens is, in the US, you've got, Johnny Archer on one end of the country, Oscar Dominguez on the other. It's just so spread out. Skylar Woodward in the Midwest or whatever. It's like you got everybody spread out so far that for people to spar and play each other, it's like it's like because if you look at like the top 20 players in the US, and there's probably a reason why they're spread out. Because if they were all in the same place, they would all be playing each other and nobody would be making any money. So what happens is you got these top players that kind of spread out. It's almost like, and I'm kind of talking out my rear because I'm kind of making this up, but it's a little theory I'm testing here, but it's a hypothesis. But it almost makes sense. Like you get players that are like the best in their areas so that they can kind of dominate regionally and pick up the money in the regional tournaments in their areas. Well, so they all have like their turf and they all kind of stay away from each other because if all the top 20 players in the US lived in the same area, they'd all be playing each other. But anyway, maybe that doesn't make any sense because my main point was the opposite, which is it's hard for our top players to play each other and sharpen sword against sword, steel against steel when they're all spread out across thousands of miles. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Europe and Philippines, it's a little bit easier in terms of geography. But okay, what matters? So we talked about what does it mean to be pro? We talked about what does that mean in terms of income. There's one last, I mean, if we talked about alternative incomes and we didn't really get to it, but I mean, there's players that are like not pro in the sense that they don't play pro tournaments, but they might play local tournaments and dominate regionally. And it's funny because I actually had a student that was like, when they said they wanted to be pro, this is what they were looking at. They were looking at regional players winning 1,000 here, 1,500 there. To them, it looked like they were winning a tournament every weekend. And I don't really want to talk about that. I'm not that interested in talking about. I'll just say I think that with Fargo and handicaps, I think that for regional players that try to duck the major leagues and just make money like a band doing smaller gigs, I think it's possible. And if you play good enough in certain areas, you might be able to win 10 to 20 grand a year. But I think that you'd be hard pressed. I don't think you're going to consistently win more than 25 grand a year scuffling. And I think the number's lower than that. I think it's probably 10 to 20 grand if you're like a really, really good regional player that stays out of the majors. And so I don't really think that scales. And for people that have the impression that these guys are winning a lot of money. And then again, you got expenses and you've got backers and you've got losses and gambling losses. And most of these people, if you look at their existence, most of these people don't have families and houses, and all the money that they have is in their pocket. And sometimes they have a lot, sometimes they don't have much. And I think that's pretty typical. So,
but I think that would even come down to personal choice though for that person. If they're asking you about that, you could lay it out and say, hey, I think if you were an absolute stone cold regional crusher, your high water is 25K. And so can you put together your life where that makes sense? Or can you live off of that? And then they have to look at it and say, well, what else am I going to do? Am I going to deliver pizzas and make 18 or 19,000 or whatever the number is? And I mean, these are all just general numbers, but if they wanted to do that, Demi, I would support them. I would say, okay, as long as you know what you're getting into and what the income looks like. And you know what I'm saying? Like, I wouldn't do it, but I could see a person saying, what, am I going to go work for Domino's and deliver pizzas and make $14 an hour? Or am I going to go grind regional tournaments and nightly tournaments and make similar money but be able to sleep till 3 p.m. if that's important? Because that seems like what they end up having to do. So I don't know. Just, yeah.
Well, yeah. And so there is a gap, and I appreciate you calling me out on that, between observation versus judgment. Of course it's not for me, but to your point, like, you can do any of these things. I mean, people do whatever they want, So yeah, I think we're just kind of reporting. So I just wanted to answer the question of like, there was a question from one of my students that was kind of like, well, what if you duck the big leagues and can't you make money doing it this way? And I just was like, well, this is kind of what you can make. And, I don't know.
Can you live off of $18,000 a year? If you can, good, go get them, champ.
And then, yeah, and that's it. And then it's like really getting down into like, the problem is that from what I've seen is the people that are, just because they're winning 18,000 a year doesn't mean that the people that are, okay, you know what? I'll just leave it at that. Can you live off 18,000 a year? I'll leave it there. Okay. So,
and it might be 10 or 9, when all the smoke clears, who knows?
Yeah. It very well could be. So,
it's
okay.
Essentially peanuts in the US. Yep. Poverty level.
Yeah, I think actually that's a really good conversation, and I'm just kind of looking at like the original sketch of an outline that I had here. And I think that covers, there's things we didn't really go into, which is, we didn't dig in super deep to like, what would it take to get to the highest level? Like what separates the Shanes from the Albans, from the John Moras, from the Chris Robinsons, from the me's to the whatever. But like that's an interesting conversation. What advantages do Europe have, or the Philippines have over the US? That's interesting. There's another, but this all kind of started from an even deeper question, which is from my students asking, but also I'm coaching a couple teenagers that are really, really hungry to pool. And there's a question about like, what do I even want for them? But in the end, I would say this. I think I'm good on that conversation, but I'd like to just bring it back to one thing, which is you and I, despite the lack of, I don't know, financial benefit at the highest, not the highest levels, but at a high level, that doesn't mean that it's not worth it. That doesn't mean that it's not worth it to some level to pursue pool. And so why don't we end this conversation by talking about, if there's no financial payoff, what's your plan? Like, what's your strategy, and why is it meaningful to you to put all this into it then?
Oh, okay. Well, so my experience with it and my decision with it was quitting pool and then starting to play again, and then getting married immediately once I started to play again. So then I had to look and say, I'm going to have a wife, house, kids, but I want to try to get to a professional level. I want to play professional level pool. And so I was starting from scratch. And so I had experience talking to the people that I went through, the number 7 guy in the world, all that stuff. And I realized if I want to do that, I have to hit certain benchmarks in things that I need to achieve, and way that I need to develop and practice and to bring my game up. But I also needed to know, or I also knew at a young age, that there was no money in it, and that I had to develop a passive income source that could support a wife, a kid, 3 kids in a house potentially. So that's the way I set out on the journey. So I practice, and I developed a business that I could someday step away from or have very, very low touches on, and it would get me enough income so that I didn't need any income from pool. I could just play, walk the earth and play, but have, a house, kids, wife, balance. So that's the way I approached it. And so that's what I did. And so that was 20 years ago. And now here I am 20 years later, and I'm getting ready to nearly retire from my business with enough income to push me forward to pursue my pool goals at 48 years old. And so it took me 20 years. But that's where I'm at now. And I don't look at pool. It doesn't even register the money to me. Like you and I talk about this all the time. Like we go out and play tournaments or something. It's like the money just goes in a drawer, and you just use it to pay expenses for the next thing. And so, but what does register for me, and the reason why I'm doing it, the reason why I worked 20 years to get into the position I'm in right now, is because I want to wake up every day and be challenged with something meaningful to me. And I haven't found that meaning in other areas of my life. Those other areas have maybe came a little easier for me, and pool has come impossibly difficult for me at times. And so there's something about that athletic training, what I need to do, the challenges that I face every day. I face challenges every day in my life with my own demons, my own problems, but I just decided, and I've always been drawn to the challenges of pool. So I like facing those demons of pool. I like having to run out when the pressure's on, and preparing to try to get into that position to see if you can make it through or not. Like, so that's what I like about pool. But the financial part is always, 20 years ago, I realized it was just absolutely off the table. I had to figure out how to build so that I could completely pull that out, because I can't surf couches. I can't make $20,000 a year. It's not an option for me. I have to, figure out a different path. So, but it's that personal challenge. It's that absolute facing my fears. I'm afraid to play in public in front of people. I get very nervous, and that's a fear that I want to face every day. And that's why I want to play pool and play pool competitively, because I want to face those fears. I'm not afraid to go out and bid a bunch of hardwood flooring jobs and make a bunch of money. It's easy for me for some reason. It's just, I'm afraid of pool, and that and I want to face that fear every day.
Yeah, it's like the hardest challenge you've ever taken on, so it's very compelling. And we've talked about how easy it is to be successful in a career compared to pool, and had that. So I might have already shared this on the podcast, but it's so funny. If I can't remember if I have, is we've talked about that at length. Like, why is it so easy to be successful in your career or in business compared to trying to be successful in pool? And I thought about it one day. I'm like, well, it's because in business, it's just you against, and there's room to succeed if you do it right. And nobody's out to get you. Like pool, you're going up against people that are trying to beat you. You have an opponent that's also training. And so if you've been training pool for 20 years, they've been training pool for 20 years to beat you. And I'm like, it would almost be like if you wanted to open up a widget store, you're going to be selling shoes. And so you're like, yeah, I want to open a shoe store in the corner. It would almost be like, okay, to make that as tough as pool, like opening a shoe store is very difficult. Don't get me wrong. But now how difficult would it be if there was some guy who his entire life, every night he's gone to bed dreaming about putting your shoe store on a business, and he's just waiting for you to open that shoe store, and he is going to just try to do everything. His life's work is going to be devoted to bankrupting your store some way, whether it's negative press or opening a competitive store and offering bigger discounts, or trying to drive people online, or bad reviews on Yelp. He's just going to be,
I'm like, and Demi, I would add to that there's not one guy, there's probably 5 guys in your small town. So you know, it's just like, it's so saturated. It's so saturated.
So I always thought that was
with
really
people
funny.
trying to do that.
Some guy, I picture some guy with some thin curly mustache.
Exactly. So
anyway, that's how tough pool is. Yeah. So okay. So and for me, it's the same thing. Like, of course, I don't look at pool. And the funny part is I could make some money playing pool if I just, tried. So you can game select. In poker, they call it game selection, right? It doesn't matter if you're the best player. You can make more money being the 100th best player in the world if you play worse players than you can being the 5th best player in the world if you play the top 4 players. So like, at least that's what they say in poker. So the point is game selection is very important. So like if I game selected to where I only played worse players, that's how you max out your short-term income. But the problem is, then it also kind of caps your growth, and you start getting to where you're like just cherry picking and only playing to me, that's kind of uninspiring. So like I could sit here and game select and only play tournaments where I thought I was positive expected value, and it could maybe eke out, a small 5 figures a year. But then the cost would be, I would not get to go play Turning Stone because that's negative EV. I wouldn't get to play Derby because that's definitely negative EV. So it's like I just wouldn't get to go do what I want to do, which is play professional pool. And so I actually sacrifice any opportunity to earn anything. I'm happy to give up, and then I'll just do training, and I'll go out and get my teeth kicked in by top players and smile about it and have fun with that challenge. And then, make my living through through the pool training I'm doing, and other things like that.
And keep developing your game. I mean, you've been developing your game through this process over the last 1.5 years. You've been training and doing that full time. It's you're not just playing. You're developing, and you're growing, and you're getting better and better and better.
And awesome. I get to give something a little bit back to. That's the other thing, is that there's nothing wrong. I mean, I'm not. I'm kind of an introverted person, but there is something cool. We've got that training, Facebook training private group that we've been doing for my students, and to watch. I mean, you've seen it. The number of players that are coming back and like, oh, here's, they're having breakthroughs and things that they've won. They show here's the last 5 years versus the last 2 months since my boot camp in terms of results. And
that's been awesome.
It's cool to hear these stories. And then I ask them like, well, what did you take away? And some of their answers are like, there are times I have a student come out where I feel like, man, did he really get everything I was trying to say? And then I see posts like that. I'm like, wow. So anyway, the point is it's making an impact, and I get to feel good about that. So, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So then I think we should wrap up and do one for the road.
Sure. Yeah.
One for the road, and with a road story.
Yep. Yeah.
So I'll go first.
Which one do you want to do?
I'll go first because mine's longer, and then yours is going to be funny. I think yours is very funny, but okay. So road story, one for the road segment, guys. We're gonna tell a little story, something that happened while we were in our travel. So I don't know why this hit me today, but this was kind of a funny experience I had at a U.S. Open one time, and I don't remember. I want to say it might have been 2011 or 12, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, I had won my first match, and now I was playing another player to get into the money. So if you win 2 matches back then, that got you in the money. And this player was a player that I it was a good draw to get in the money. Like, it wasn't like a top international pro. I'm like, okay, I got reasonable winning chances. And the format, it's a race to 11 9-ball. And I was a little tense. I was like tight and nervous, and it's a money match, and I know I had a good chance to win, but I also know this guy plays good. And for whatever reason, I was just sometimes it's hard to get started, right? And I was playing tight, and this guy was playing well. And what I remember is just like it was one of those sets where everything I had was like the 1 through the 6 would be wide open, but then the 7, 8, 9 would be laying such that you were going to be very, very exposed at the end of the rack, and there's just nothing you can do about it. And the balls are sitting tough to where they're just not sitting to where you're always going to be able to run out, especially if you're tight. And so, like, I was just coming up short and coming up short and coming up short, and everything was just a little off. And I'm falling behind, and I'm behind 5-2 when this incident takes place. I'm behind 5-2, and that's a pretty big game now, because if I win this game, then it's 3-5. I'm breaking. I just won a game, and I'm starting to maybe, settle in. But if I dog it and I'm down 6-2 with him breaking and me continuing to be snake bit, that's starting to become like, 3-5, I'm very live. 2-6, I'm no longer in the mix. So I'm trying to think of something that rhymes. So it was a big game. And what happened was he scratched on the break at 5-2. And I ran a couple balls and had to run up to there's a cluster. So I ran up and played like a lock-up safety. I want to say it was like on the 6th ball. And he missed the kick, and I had ball in hand. So now I've got ball in hand, and he's on 2 fouls. And so for, people that might not play, there's a 3-foul rule. If he fouls a third time, that's loss of game. I win the game. If I can play a safety and get ball in, and get him to miss the hit, then I win the game. But the problem was the 6, 7, 8, 9, you're thinking, well, why don't I just run out? Well, the 7 was on the side rail and didn't pass the 8 into the corner. There was no way to play the combo. So my choice was I could either play the 6, try to land my cue ball between the 7 and 8, and then try to shoot the 7 ball down the rail past the side pocket into the upper corner. Or I could try to go for a third foul and get a hook and maybe just win the game. And this is a huge decision at the time. I felt like this decision was for my tournament. And so I was looking at it, and I'm like, man, I'm really not feeling super confident. So trying to like A, land between the 7, 8, and B, make that shot, it just seemed really tough. But then the problem was, if I played a safety and he kicks and hits the ball, now it's even tougher, because now who knows what kind of shot I'm going to get, much less an angle to get on that ball. So if I'm ever going to try to run out, like basically any advantage I have in the rack goes away. If he hits that ball in a kick shot, like there's so much equity in him for hitting that ball, because now I don't necessarily have a good shot or a good angle to get on that 7. And now it's just who knows what I'm going to get. So it's like, what do I want to do? Do I want to take control of my destiny or play some kind of ineffective safe and hope he just misses some one rail kick? And I decided I'm going to go for the run, because if I'm so snake bit I can't run these 4 balls, I'm not going to win this match anyway. So might as well just go all in and go for it. So I shoot the 6, and I play my cue ball between the 7, 8, and I bounce off the rail just a little farther than I want. So now I have to cut this ball up the side rail from just a little bit of an uncomfortable cut angle. And I shoot the ball, and it runs the rail, and it hangs, and it doesn't fall. And the ball, and this is very important, the ball hangs on the top of the head rail part of the pocket. Like it's on the head rail point of the corner pocket. I hung the ball up, and the cue ball's in the dead middle of the table. I left him straight on a hanging 7 ball. The 8's easy to get on now, and the 9's wide open. I'm just like devastated. I'm just devastated I missed this shot. And so he's walking to the table, and I'm just completely devastated. So as a joke, and I only said this to try to cheer myself up, because when I make a blunder like that, I can either cry or I can laugh. And so I laugh. I looked at him and I said, "You're on 2," because I'm warning him that he's on 2 fouls, which is what the rule is when you got a guy on 2 fouls. And I just jokingly said, "You're on 2." And the reason that's pointless, of course, is because he's straight on the 7 ball. Like there's no reason to warn the guy he's going to shoot the 7 in. It doesn't matter that he's on 2. But it was just I was just trying to cheer myself up. I said, "You're on 2." And here's where the story gets really strange. He stopped and he looked at me and he says, "No, I'm not." And so then we have this really weird conversation because what the right reply should have been was like, it doesn't matter. I'm shooting at the 7. But he was like, no, I'm not. I'm like, well, actually, you are. Remember, because you scratched the brake. Remember, you scratched the brake, and then I played that safety. And so we have this 30-second conversation about how he's on 2 fouls when it absolutely doesn't make any difference at all. And so then he was just looked kind of confused, and finally he's like, okay, yeah, you're right. So then he gets down and looks at the 7 ball. And the 7 ball was on the point part of the corner pocket. And so maybe he had to cut it a little bit thin. And somehow this conversation about being on 2, I don't know if it just took him out of the present or if he was worried about missing the whole ball, trying to cut it thin or what. But he shot it like he just got down and shot it really straight and shot it right into the tip that it was hanging on. And it was like it was hanging and he just shot straight into it and it just rattled and didn't fall. And I don't know how, honestly, I don't know how you could shoot a hanging ball and not make it. But he did. He got down and shot that ball right into the tip, and it hung up again. And then I was like totally bewildered, and I just ran those balls out to go 5-3. And then somehow everything shifted, and I won 8 games in a row, and he never won another game, and I beat him 11-5 and made the money. And it was just like the weirdest thing, man. So I don't know. There was just something about that conversation to where once in a while, if I ever have a guy on 2 fouls and I like don't get the hook, I always think about that. Like, somehow I said, you're on 2. And then everything just kind of went sideways. And it's just weird, man. It's just weird how pool works. And maybe you had to be there, but that's my road story for the day.
Yeah.
And you were railing that match, right?
Yeah, I was railing. It was absolutely funny.
You were right there.
We knew that guy from before. And it was crazy. And I wonder if that's the 2-inning lineage here where Antonio Linning just torched me like in 2 innings.
Oh yeah, the Gong Show. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was
the Gong Show. Yeah. Anyway,
that was brutal.
That's funny. Okay, and then my quick road story. Mine will be really, really quick. So traveling down from Minnesota to Kansas City, I think it was, and it was in the winter. And so I have narcolepsy. I fall asleep driving. It's very dangerous for me to drive. So most of the time I'm like this horrible road partner where I can only drive for an hour or so, and then everyone's life is in jeopardy. No, it's not that bad, but it's not good. So when I was going to this tournament, it was with shout out to Brian Brecky. I went with Brian Brecky. We've mentioned him before on the podcast. So we were taking his car and he was driving, of course. And it's about an 8-hour drive. Well, maybe not. I don't remember. 7-hour drive typically. Well, it's winter. We're going through the plains of Iowa and all these different things. Literally whiteout conditions. I mean, it's just blizzard. And we took off and it was snowing. And basically by the time we made the Iowa border from Minnesota, which is an hour or two, I just went to sleep. I'm just like, I'm going to close my eyes. Well, we get there and it's 7 hours, 8 hours, whatever it ends up being. I end up sleeping almost entirely the whole way, just off and on or mostly sleeping. And we finally pull in to Kansas City. And I look over at Brian and I wake up and I kind of stretch and I look over and I go, that wasn't too bad. And he had his hands on the steering wheel and his knuckles were white and he was just like white knuckled for 7-8 hours straight of driving through a blizzard. And he just looked at me and he started laughing and he's like, I'm going to literally murder you right now. Because that was not nothing. That was not easy. I just got us here and risked life and limb and white knuckled it for 8 hours and you slept the whole way. So
yeah, you sleep the whole way. You peel your eyes open. You're like, oh, we're already here. Oh, that wasn't bad.
We're already here. Gosh, I said, no, that went fast. Yeah, it's like, no,
so
it didn't
funny.
go fast. It was literally seconds on the clock ticking off for the guy with both our lives in his hand while I slept like a baby in the car in the seat next to him.
I love that. I mean, it's not
awful,
the funny part is,
road partner.
That's the funniest part about playing pool and kind of traveling around and stuff. It's like, yeah, there's funny things that happen on the table, like the you're on 2 fouls and different things. But then like some of the best moments are like that. Those are just like very fun. So thanks for sharing that one. I always love that story. And having the chance to have traveled with you. No, you're man, you're an awesome road partner. I really enjoy it. So I'm just teasing. So okay, that's it. So let's see. Anything that we need to do to wrap up? We've done our we've done our one for the road. We've done our shout out. We've done our moment of silence, which is in all seriousness, and then had a good talk. So I think we're good. So let's just wrap it up, and we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, that sounds good, Dan. It was awesome talking to you, and I hope people pick something up and everything is good. So yeah, awesome, man.
Take care.
You too.